Previously on Crime Adjacent. This story starts with Tommy Coulee. He was 30, lonely, closeted, and also a beloved and liked by everyone type of guy. He owned an auto shop. He loved science fiction and alone time. He seemed to have no enemies or risk factors that police look for, like what could the victim have done to bring this on himself type of thing. If you didn't listen to the first episode, here's what you need to know. On December 23rd, 1995, Tommy drove from Ridgewood to Hunter Hill Rest Stop in Vallejo. He met a man there. The man then drove him all the way back to Ridgewood, about 20 miles. And sometime around midnight, more or less, the man basically stomped Tommy to death in a secluded lover's lane in a beautiful valley on the outskirts of town. That's the broad strokes, to catch you up. What happened to him? The focus of this episode will look at who could have done this to him, and why. This is touchy. Detective Jones told me some police officers at the time said Tommy did bring on his own murder. He went to Hunter Hill Rest Stop late at night. It was a known gay cruising spot. It was dark, seedy, desolate. There were muggings and assaults and assailants who just slipped back onto the freeway, escaping into a sea of red lights. Tommy should have known better, they said. And yet, as Detective Jones would later ask me, was it Tommy's fault that he felt so scared to be his real self in town in Ridgewood, that he felt his only possible way to find connection was to drive 3 towns away for anonymous roadside hookups at a run-down government beige rest stop? Is that really on Tommy, this community in which he felt unsafe to be? Or is that bigger? Is that on us? I don't know, but I can't stop thinking about it when I think about this case. Personal agency, social forces, who's to say? Like I said, touchy. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the Patreon chat or in our true crime reading group. Go deep or go home. I'm here for it. But that's not the focus of this episode. Not really. It does come into play for sure, especially as more men were taken. But we'll get to that soon enough. For now, the focus of this episode will be on an FBI profile that Ridgewood police asked for. They needed one, Detective Jones told me, because they had no real leads and no real suspects, and she was sick to death of following serial killers up and down the entire state, searching for Tommy's killer. Here's the story. But first, you can follow along with these cases and unlock a members-only community at our Patreon page, where you can also find a true crime and criminal profiling reading group where we can learn and discuss big issues together. Like I said, go deep or go home. From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, the never-ending true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. Although Ridgewood is just one small town in Northern California, about halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento, Detective Jones told me she got to know the entire state well since the first spree of killings way back in the 1990s, especially the roadways. California has a total of 25 interstates. It has a staggering 318 state highways and many more rural and 2-lane roads, for a grand total of something like 400,000 total road miles, the second most in the entire country behind Texas. Here's something else. It's quite possible that a serial killer has operated along each and every one of these roadways. I'm not going to nerd out too much here. Lord knows I can nerd out. That's what happens when a sociologist finds you and raises you. But I find it fascinating that something so innocuous like poured concrete and endless miles of road can have these huge societal ripple effects that end with easier travel, new adventures, connection, opportunity, and death. I'm talking about the interstate highway system, President Eisenhower's baby. It started in 1956 and wasn't finished for decades. In fact, Interstate 80 rolls right through Ridgewood and wasn't completed until the mid-1960s, when the entire Bay Area began to see a rise in interstate travel, yes, but also in serial killers. In her book, Killer on the Road, Violence in the American Interstate, Author Ginger Strand pointed to the links between the creation of this highway system and the rise of serial killers that became noticeable in the 50s and 60s and 70s. For one thing, there were suddenly so many easy victims. They were on roadsides out looking to hitchhike or hook up at truck stops or rest stops. People on the fringes of society who might not even be missed, at least not right away. Not like a kid snatched off a bike in the suburbs. And then, it was just so easy to slip away, to blend in, like the car in the next lane over, and then be in another state altogether within hours. The FBI would later create the Highway Serial Killer Initiative because they, too, saw links between long-haul truckers, multi-jurisdictional murders, and endless miles of anonymous roadways. These freeway killers? They have haunted Jones, kept her up at night. After the original series of murders in Ridgewood in the 1990s, after the killer wreaked absolute havoc on the town and then vanished, Detective Jones said she spent years poring over all their case files. She told me she was trying to match the Ridgewood murders to other notorious killers, wondering if something had slipped through the cracks or been overlooked, which she said happened far too often, even today. I spoke to her at her office at City Hall. She pointed to the photos of Tommy Coulee and all those who came after him and said, "They always reminded me, keep going, leave no stone unturned." When it comes to California and roadways and rest stops and serial killers, there are just so many stones. Beginning in the late 1960s, one of the most notorious serial killers in California history, William Bonin, began kidnapping young boys along highways and gas stations or rest stops. He'd rape them and beat them and then abandon them by the side of the road, warning them he'd be back if they talked. The book Without Redemption by Vonda Pelto and Michael Butler retraced his steps from a horrific childhood of abuse and molestation to his own later sprees of doing the exact same thing to other boys. Bonin was actually caught and convicted of sexual assault a few times. In fact, he served a sentence at Vacaville's California Medical Facility just next door to Ridgewood. Another book, Angel of Darkness by Dennis McDougal, this one is about another freeway killer I'll get to soon enough, said Bonin kept raping inmates at the prison and was considered just not treatable. And yet, at some point, despite all this, he was released in 1974, the threat considered over. It's so maddening, these second and third and fourth chances, even after detailed abuse, because Bonin was just getting started. The Morbid podcast detailed his horrific timeline of crimes up and down the entire freeway system of Southern California. With 4 accomplices, yes, other men he met who were also into raping and murdering young boys. He began taking boys off the streets and performing the most agonizing tortures imaginable in his van, which was kitted out for just such experiences. I'm not going to get into the details. You can listen to the whole story at Morbid. It's heartbreaking. But the synopsis is this. These men would rape and beat and torture boys and young men, sometimes to the point of killing them for mere shock before they had completed everything they wanted to do. And then they'd just go out and grab another boy, sometimes that day or the next day, whatever they could find. In one case, this is the one that drew Jones' attention. Bonin strangled a boy to death while, at the same time, his accomplice jumped up and down on his chest, stomping him to death. She wondered, was there a Ridgewood connection? They dumped these boys along freeways and rest stops and rural roads like litter. The papers started calling him the freeway killer. He was responsible for at least 20 deaths and likely more, according to police. Jones looked deeply into his case, but had to rule him out. He had been in prison since 1980, when he was literally caught red-handed by police, who by this point had been following him and personally witnessed him trying to lure boys into his van in Hollywood. Police actually broke into his van to stop an assault in progress. Bonin was executed in February 1996, at exactly the same time things were spiraling out of control in Ridgewood. He became the first California inmate to die by lethal injection. Jones told me, "We knew, of course, that the rest stop killer couldn't be the freeway killer because the whole case was different and Bonin was, well, in San Quentin. But it was all over the news at the time, the first lethal injection. It felt like there was just something in the air. So much death. So Jones moved on to the next suspect and found another man operating at the same time, in the same area, and who was even given the same name, the Freeway Killer. Randy Kraft was also known as the Scorecard Killer because of a sort of score sheet found after his arrest. It had cryptic codes about possible victims. He operated in the 1970s, mostly in Southern California, like along the 405 in Long Beach and in San Bernardino, but even as far away as Oregon and Michigan. He'd rape and murder young boys and men and dump their bodies along roadsides. But Jones saw that he, too, was arrested in the 80s. It couldn't be him. So she looked closer to home, and she said, was sort of amazed by just how many serial killers operated along Bay Area roadways. For starters, in the early 1970s, the co-ed killer, Ed Kemper, prowled Bay Area roads, picking up hitchhikers from Berkeley to Santa Cruz and murdering 10 people, including his own grandparents and eventually his own mother. Kemper fled after his last killing of his mother, but called the cops back in Santa Cruz to admit to the crimes. The cops didn't believe him. Ed was a drinking buddy of theirs. They were so close they thought he was joking. It reminded me, in a way, of the chummy links between Ridgewood suspects and the cops. Like I said, it's a small town. Kemper was not alone. At the same time, Herbert Mullen murdered 10 people during his spree, and John Lindley Frazier committed a mass murder of an entire family, claiming he was avenging the environment. In the span of a few short years, 28 people were killed along the roadways, and the city of Santa Cruz was dubbed the murder capital of the world at one point. Because the DA basically agreed with the reporter's statement and repeated it, and this became the official label, according to Lookout Santa Cruz. In a future episode, I'll get into the social and verbal give and take and how it played a role in naming so many killers over the years, including the rest stop killer. Closer to Ridgewood, there was the Zodiac, who prowled roads from Vallejo to Benicia to San Francisco to a beautiful lake near wine country, not far from Ridgewood. The I-5 Strangler operated along Interstate 5 about 20 miles east of Ridgewood. The Night Stalker, the Golden State Killer, it seemed as if Jones could put any serial killer on any road or near any rest stop. But none of these killers seemed to match. Different behaviors, different victims, different token taken from each victim. She never revealed, not until 2023, exactly what that token was or why it was so important. Either way, she kept coming back to the rest stop in the valley, and after she ruled everyone else out, she was stuck. So that gets me to the meat of it, the FBI profile. It offered important insight into who they might be looking for, and it turned out to be rather accurate. I'm really going to dig in deep here, so hang on. Here's what it said about Tommy and his killer. Jones gave me the same speech she said the FBI gave her back in the 1990s. I'd heard this one before, plenty. She said, a profile doesn't give you a name, like Clue. It's Bob in the library with a candlestick. But it narrows the pool of suspects. What a crime scene looks like helps in this process. Robert Ressler, one of the first FBI profilers, divided crime scenes into two categories, organized and disorganized. He and John Douglas and Ann Burgess and Carol Hartman, they wrote a whole study about it in 1986. We'll read this one in our true crime reading group. It's fascinating and it's become a seminal text. They said, an organized scene usually involved positioning bodies, care to erase evidence, perhaps a usual murder method, and a general sense of planning or thought. A disorganized crime scene would be more haphazard, denoting a crime of opportunity or perhaps a drug-induced spree. Jones said the crime scene and the injuries on Tommy's body threw detectives for a loop. On the one hand, Tommy's body seemed to have all the hallmarks of a disorganized killer, a haphazard display of rage and a missing wallet. At first, police thought it was a mugging gone wrong, or perhaps even a lover's quarrel. The missing wallet told the story of a robbery, while the violence told the story of a criminal looking to cover his tracks with overkill, the hallmarks of a random, panicked, disorganized killer. On the other hand, once more men were killed in the same manner, the scene took on the hallmarks of a very organized offender, Someone who put a lot of thought into a very unique and horrible way of killing. The location of the crime also spoke volumes. The murder occurred in a small valley on the western edge of town. There's rolling hills studded with oaks and laurels. There's a shimmering lake in the middle. And although Interstate 80 cuts right through the valley, the lake on one side, a few big estates on the other, including Daniel Palmer's, it's peaceful here. Quiet. There's a tow yard and a motel in the small valley, and that's basically it in terms of services. Hundreds of thousands of motorists pass through the valley each day along the freeway, millions a week. But unless you stopped, you'd never know just how quiet and secluded this valley truly was. For this reason, it was known as a lover's lane spot for locals, and this told investigators that the killer must be a local as well. Who else would know this area? FBI profiler Genevieve Johnson, I've actually seen it both ways and couldn't track her down, maybe someone can, said Tommy walked willingly to his own demise. She examined 2 sets of footprints walking from a frontage road not far from the tow yard to a pile of hay bales. She said Tommy and the killer likely parked on the road, walked to the hay bales, and then perhaps enjoyed the peaceful night together, listening to the gentle ripples of the lake and looking up at an ink-black sky riddled with twinkling stars. Before, well, you know what happened to Tommy after that. But this whole scene, the casual footprints, the setting, they tell us so much according to this early profile. Johnson said the killer was a charmer. She wasn't, and I'm not, trying to glorify this guy. But the truth is, he was able to talk Tommy into his car, drive him 20 miles back to Ridgewood with no visible signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no binding. He was able to walk with Tommy from the car to the hay bales, casually, no stutter steps, no hesitation. The two were out for a stroll under a night sky. Maybe the killer held a gun, it's possible. But profilers have seen this before. For Tommy, it was about connection, about finding someone to be with when he didn't feel safe finding that person in Ridgewood. And maybe, he thought, he had found someone. Finally. For the killer, it was all one big sadistic game. Johnston said serial killers like this, they want total control and domination of their victims. It is part of the fantasy world they inhabit, which involves the hunt and a way of killing that is particular to them. She pointed to John Wayne Gacy, who would trick his victims into wrapping cords around their own necks or putting on handcuffs, as if simply practicing magic tricks with him before the killer stepped in to squeeze. The BTK killer, short for bind, torture, kill, had a ready kill bag with ropes, plastic, and tape. The I-5 strangler, not to be confused with the I-5 killer, was later identified as a devout parachutist and was caught because he left behind a piece of his jump rope. The profiler said each killer had a different MO, but the need for control and domination remained the same, as it did here. There was privacy, a charming con game, a sneak attack, and then an incredible amount of rage as the killer jumped on Tommy over and over again, practically flattening the man to the earth. This would all be part of the macabre sadistic fantasy. Johnston also raised another possibility with a term neither Jones nor Williams had heard before: reaction formation. In psychology, it's basically regarded as an internal defense mechanism that leads people to do the opposite of how they're feeling. Probably the most noticeable example of this is when men overcompensate for feelings of masculine inferiority by play acting, big bad alpha man with big trucks, big guns, and misogyny. In this case, Johnston suspected that the killer was likely a closeted gay man, as 2 of his early victims were, and that he was basically overcompensating. The rage and violence let profilers know he was likely taking out his anger about being gay and made to feel ashamed about it, either by parents or society or both. He hated men he considered weak. This is not at all to say gay men are weak. Rather, this would be the killer's mindset according to the profile. Johnston said the killer could be a very sociable man, capable of acting like a real man's man, but inside, he'd be burning up with anger at the men he thought were living the life he truly wanted, and he would enact his revenge on them. The early profile also suspected he would be married. Serial killers are not always loners. Many organized offenders are married, such as the Golden State Killer, the Long Island serial killer, BTK, Israel Keys, the zip tie killer. At one point anyway, before, well. To sum all this up, Tommy's body and the crime scene told investigators plenty. Jones remembers almost verbatim what Johnston told her nearly 30 years ago. To catch the killer, Johnston said to look for this: a strong man, white, 30s to 40s, handsome, possibly closeted himself, possibly displaying hypermachismo to friends and family. He was probably from Ridgewood, or maybe nearby Fairfield or Vacaville. He'd be controlling, easy to anger. But he'd also be capable of charm, because that was all part of the hunt, his way to dupe men into his trap. He might be married, even capable of holding down a high-level job of some sort, given he probably had a nice car and maintained it well. He was capable of creating a plan and executing it. He was capable of luring young, strong, highly intelligent men to their demise without them suspecting a thing until, wham, he surprised them and knocked them out cold. And this is critical. Johnston said he'd never stop. Ever. So, remember when I said I grew up in Ridgewood and things got complicated? It's not important to this case, and I know some of you have heard this before in previous episodes, but maybe it gives you some insight into why I do this, why I felt drawn to this case and these victims in particular. The long and short of it is that my parents kicked me out. I was 12 at the time. Scared, alone, smaller, different body altogether. Like many street kids, I did what I had to do to survive. So I learned a thing or two about getting into strange cars with strange men, who to trust, when to run, how to fight, all that. It becomes sort of a survival skill. What I mean to say is, I've got some experience in those tiny, sudden, cramped moments when you find yourself alone with imminent danger and everything suddenly changes. My adopted mother, the one who found me, Susan, she was a sociologist, and I can guarantee you exactly what she'd call this. Oh my God, I'm going to totally nerd out again. Bear with me, I'll keep it short, but it's important, I think, for a better picture of how killers operate on the dark edges of society. Susan said I developed what sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called a habitus, or like this internalized embodied disposition, how we move, how we act, based on the social surroundings we encounter most. Time in places, that's what makes us. Here's what I mean. Have you ever been to a fancy restaurant or event and felt completely out of place, like you don't know all the rules and rituals and you feel sort of awkward? That's habitus. Some people have money to spend a lot of time in these places, and it sort of rubs off, becomes a part of themselves. They're at ease there, comfortable. I was never comfortable in fancy places. I'm still not. But I had developed this embodied disposition for the streets. For sensing danger, you have to as a street kid. I'm guessing the killer had this ease at the rest stop. He blended in. He spent a lot of time cruising roadways and rest stops and trying to pick up victims along freeways. I bet after so much time, he felt totally at home there, comfortable. I'm guessing Tommy did not. None of this is personal, not at all. It's all a product of how and where we're raised and some combination of class and money and race and gender all combining to form an idea of where we feel most comfortable. We may not even realize it until we suddenly feel uneasy. That's habitus. Tommy had the habitus for an auto garage and customers and being a generally nice citizen around town. That goes a long way in running a business. But in those cramped, dark, eerie moments of danger, I'm not so sure. Tommy was just a regular guy. Maybe with elevated risks because of how society treats gay people and the ends he thought he had to go to simply find the connection we all crave. Okay, nerd out done. I'll save it for the reading groups next time. But here's the point. To a sadistic predator like the rest stop killer, Tommy would have stuck out. If this was his first time at the rest stop, he would have been ill at ease, nervous, innocent. He would have been targeted. Tommy's body, The crime scene, the profile, Profiler Johnston said they combined to reveal a lot about the killer's behavior. The killer was a watcher, for one thing, or a predatory stalker in profile speak. Like many serial killers, the rest stop killer obsessively searched for new victims, prowling roads and rest stops for just the right person. The Zodiac did this. Ed Kemper, BTK, the .44 caliber killer, later known as Son of Sam. Jones said police knew the killer had a car because victims were picked up at one location and left to die in another. Obvious. At first, investigators presumed the killer would flash a gun or a knife, something to force his targets into cars. But that type of violence would stand out, attract attention, or send out those hair on the back of the neck warning vibes that would keep men away. On the streets, you quickly pick up on the type and steer clear. Witnesses might have come forward. I heard a struggle. I heard a gunshot. There might be evidence left behind. A potential victim might simply run away. But there was nothing. No witnesses. No signs of distress. No blood. No binding. No cries for help. Nothing. Just Tommy's car, cold and abandoned. Like he vanished. So investigators theorized the killer's car, along with the man himself, was neat, orderly, and clean. Attractive even. Men went willingly with him. He was probably handsome or close to it, a good talker, conversant. That meant he probably held down a solid job, had means, maybe an education. Based on all this, I suspect that by the time Tommy arrived between 9:30 and 10 p.m. that night, the killer was already there, watching, waiting, like a hunter focused on the savannah for prey rather than following one man over an extended period of time. What if he got away? Tommy's car was pointed towards the rest stop, probably affording him a good view of the comings and goings of men. The killer likely did the same. He would want a good vantage point of everything. The building, the picnic tables, the bay fog in the distance, the twinkling spires of the Golden Gate, the men coming and going in groups of two to the bushes. If this was Tommy's first time, he would have been a nervous, fidgeting wreck. I can picture him in the driver's seat, scanning the building, getting up the nerve to approach. He probably waited for a clean, good-looking man to enter the building. His palms were probably sweaty, his breathing heavy and fast. Police recovered a new members-only jacket at the crime scene the next morning, and I have a good idea that he played with the zipper endlessly. I had a jacket just like it. I did the same. I can picture Tommy gripping the steering wheel, opening and closing the driver's side door, kicking himself for not making a move. Then, after at least an hour of going back and forth, he finally did it. He opened the door. He stepped into the cold night air. Tommy Coulee took a chance. This night, finally, he would begin to really, truly live. Headlights would have smacked into him right away. The killer would not want him to get away. He would not want his mark to make it to the bathroom, perhaps meet another man, perhaps slip into the bushes and disappear. He had been watching Tommy closely. He would have seen the whole thing. He would have seen Tommy drive to the rest stop, watched him park, watched Tommy study the rest stop. He would have seen Tommy open his door a few times. Should I stay? Should I go? As soon as the young man stepped out of his car, the killer was on him. His engine rumbled to life. The headlights clicked on, illuminating the shy, nervous, good-looking young man. Tommy would have thrown up his hands, blocking the light, fearful that he had been caught by the cops. But it wasn't the cops, of course. Police believe the killer talked Tommy into the car. Tommy was not a fellow human with feelings and goals and a life of his own, after all. He was a target, a means to an end for the killer's main goal: total control and domination. And then, in the end, annihilation. In order to achieve this, the killer would have to fake it, keep the crazy in check, if only for a while. Still, there would be signs, vibes noticeable to seasoned rest stop cruisers. But if this was Tommy's first time, it's entirely possible he missed the important signals, the leakage, as they call it. FBI profilers will tell you, if an abductor wants to take you from one point to another, fight like hell. Sure, you might get injured or worse at point A, but once you get to point B, where they are in total control, your chances decrease dramatically. But there was no struggle at point A, as far as anyone could tell. After a period of conversation, it's impossible to know how long, perhaps Tommy was convinced. The co-ed killer, Ed Kemper, would check his watch as a ploy to put hitchhikers at ease. If he was busy and had other places to be, how could he be a threat? I wonder if the rest stop killer did something similar with Tommy, wielding a dark tool of a dark trade meant to put his victims at ease. My guess is that the killer played on Tommy's obvious naivete. He probably said they would go somewhere else, somewhere nicer, not the sleazy freeway rest stop. Tommy deserves something special, something romantic for his first time. And the killer knew just the place. Whatever he said, it was enough. So Tommy, with his bright blue eyes and easy smile, took a chance. A lake, the stars, it all probably sounded so much nicer than a dingy rest stop. It probably felt just right. So he got into the car. Hunter Hill was point A. Ridgewood was point B. At 7:33 a.m. the next morning, roughly the same time Tommy's car was being towed away from Hunter Hill, local resident Daniel Palmer Jr. made a 911 call to police on his cell phone from the valley. The 911 call was recorded years before the department switched to digital files, so it has a grainy feel to it. Still, Palmer's confusion was evident. He thought it might be an animal at first. Then he stopped. You can hear him gasp as if he covered his mouth. He finally says, "It's a person." There was a crackle in the recording, a pause. Then he demanded, "Send the chief, now." And then the line went dead. Daniel Palmer and his family would play an important role in this case. For one thing, they owned much of the valley land at the edge of Ridgewood, where Tommy was discovered that morning. For another thing, ever since this first 911 call, the entire Palmer family would become suspects. With few leads and more murders, everyone in Ridgewood soon fell under the microscope of police inquiries, including a wealthy family like the Palmers. Daniel Palmer, late 30s at the time, big, strong, handsome, and heir to the town's richest family, told police he was out for a hike in his beloved valley the morning he discovered Tommy's body, according to the first witness statements. He had big plans to turn this land into high-priced subdivisions with a golf course and a shopping district. He loved to watch the sunrise over the hills, clean up any beer bottles and garbage from those who used the area as a makeout spot or illegal dumping ground the night before. That's what he told Ida Jones and Detective Williams, according to the statements. Although Palmer's housing developments practically funded the police department, Jones said later that of course they checked out his alibi for Tommy's murder and all those that would come later. Palmer had access to the land, after all. He knew it probably better than anyone. He was the right age, right sex, right race. Serial killers usually stuck to their own racial groups. And although he looked put together, like a movie star version of a boardroom CEO with salt and pepper hair and an ever-present American flag lapel pin, like a politician, Daniel Palmer was known around town for losing his temper when development deals didn't go his way. I need to note here, legally, Daniel Palmer declined interview requests through his lawyer, who said repeatedly that Palmer had never been a suspect. Although, that's not technically true. But you get the gist. Lawyers. Jones and Williams arrived at the scene within minutes and turned back an ambulance. No need. They cordoned off the area. They took a statement from Palmer. Despite his heated objections, they checked Palmer's boots into evidence to distinguish them from Tommy's and anyone else who might have been out there that night. Then they went about investigating the body. The damage stood out, obviously. Neither had seen anything like it. You can find all the details in episode 1. When they discovered Tommy's wallet was missing, they immediately chalked it up to a robbery. Tommy was fully dressed, jeans, jacket, navy blue sweater from the Macy's in nearby Fairfield, a members-only jacket. But there was something odd. Something about Tommy's clothes. Something was missing, something that should be there, but appeared to be purposefully taken. It was curious. Police never released this information. It would become a key piece of the investigation, something known only to them and the killer. If they could find this article of clothing, something only the killer would know about, they would also find their man. This key piece of information, the killer's signature souvenir, wouldn't be released until 2023, when the full scope of his crimes would become clear. At the moment, it just seemed strange. Police focused on the wallet. Definitely a robbery, they said. Had to be. Maybe Tommy was kidnapped. Maybe he was forced out there. They couldn't tell. Tommy's case went almost immediately cold. They had nothing. A few days went by. A week. Nearly 2 weeks. There were no leads, no suspects. Tommy's case looked like a tragic one-off. Jones later admitted that she often wondered if Tommy's case was growing cold because they had no leads, or because too many people just didn't care as much once it was learned that Tommy was gay. But then, in the early morning hours of Sunday, January 7th, 1996, exactly 2 weeks after Tommy was found, another 911 call came into the police department. It was Daniel Palmer again, the developer. He was on his cell phone, calling from nearly the exact same spot in the valley. He didn't sound so confused this time, more like put out. He sighed loudly into the phone and told police something shocking. He'd just discovered another body. Next time on Crime Adjacent. Ida Jones, then a detective trainee, said she looked at the next victim and knew immediately this wasn't another robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. Jones said, with the next victim, Bobby, the first Bobby, we knew we had a monster on our hands. Remember to review and like Crime Adjacent wherever you listen to podcasts. And check out our Patreon page to unlock ad-free listening, bonus information, or to become a part of the biggest, nerdiest true crime and criminal profiling reading group you could ever hope to find. I hope to see you there. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with a reminder, you'll never unhear what happens next.